Ever asked yourself how the best hackers learn their craft? Have you ever thought about that? And by hackers, I don't mean criminals, people who break into people's websites and commit acts of fraud or theft. I mean hackers, people who can go out and make computers bend to their own will. I'm fascinated with this question of how the best hackers learn their craft because I see hacking really as one of the high levels of a creative exercise. I mean, think about it. Often in today's life, we're trapped into a particular world that a vendor gives us. For example, if you buy an iPhone, you're trapped in this app ecosystem. But hackers, they can free you from those ecosystems. They can take those computers and make them do something they're not supposed to do, something extraordinary. I've been studying some of the most high-performance hackers for a long time, and I think there's a system that you can use to build high-performance hackers, and just as importantly, build teams and pipelines of computer security talent, hacking talent. Before I get into that, though, I want to introduce you to some of the world's best hackers, just to give you an idea of what I mean by this. So this, in my field, is a very famous hacker. His name is George Hotz. He was a CMU student, and he was a member of one of my hacking teams. And the reason he was famous, or infamous, if you will, is when the iPhone was first released, it was tethered to only work on AT&T. Now, this was purely a business relationship, not a technology limitation. It was done by Apple and AT&T for no other reason that they want to box people into a particular solution. So George Hotz at 17 came up with the very first iPhone jailbreak. He came up with software vulnerabilities that would allow him to jailbreak the iPhone and install any software he wanted, in particular, unlock it so it could work on other compatible carriers. And he went on to do other amazing hacks, such as root the PlayStation 3 and find 0 days, brand new undiscovered vulnerabilities in a number of very, very popular products, such as Adobe, Firefox, and
fighting through traffic jams,
or people like the last Pwn2Own winner, Richard Zhu. So Richard Zhu is a Carnegie Mellon student as well. And at Pwn2Own, if you think about it, it's an amazing contest. The rules are pretty simple. You're presented with a laptop running a fully patched version of the operating system with the most up-to-date version of the web browser. There's no known vulnerabilities in these. This is the best at that time that large companies like Microsoft, Apple, and Google can build. So you're presented this laptop and your goal is to break into it. So you sit down, you use your years of training and expertise to come up with new 0 days, and then you demonstrate them by showing that you can get into that computer and have persistence. You can also make a lot of money doing this. It's not uncommon for people to make hundreds of thousands of dollars when they find those new 0 days, because it's a creative exercise, and when they find those 0 days, they turn them over to vendors so the vendors can patch their products and make them better. So the subject of this talk today is what makes someone like Richard or George tick? How did they get to that level? And I want to start a conversation of this because I see hacking as a sport, something that we need to start building training and curriculum around to get to those higher levels. So at Carnegie Mellon, I'm a professor, and I run a competitive hacking team across the world, Korea, Russia, and in the US. They're competitive hacking contests where teams of hackers battle in full spectrum combat. These are on closed networks, it's not the open internet, set up by hackers for hackers. And the name of our team is the Plaid Parliament Opponent. It's been the #1 US competitive hacking team since 2011, the #1 overall in the world 3 of the past 7 years, and it has won 4 of the past 5 DEF CONs. And DEF CON, if you've ever been to it, if you go to where the hackers are, is the Super Bowl of hacking. It's where people like George and Richard compete against others at their same caliber to see who can break into others and who has the best defense. So in this talk, I wanted to cover some of the lessons that we've learned and some of the thoughts that we have about how we use and how many of the experts, people like George and Richard, use games called Capture the Flag contests to really master their skills. And the reason I think that this is important is sometimes when I look at industry solutions, they're a little bit different than how the top hackers I know went and built up their skill set. I also want to talk about how these hacking competitions, these Capture the Flag contests, help gamify learning about computer security, how it makes it fun. And then I want to also talk about what it takes when you get to that top level to become a hacker and how to continue building a top-ranking team. But I think there's a message in how we've set up the system, which is how do you build a pipeline of hackers? So at Carnegie Mellon University, since 2011, we've been the top US team. We also have, if people work hard, turnover every 4 years where those undergraduates graduate. And so we had to set up a system where we expect people to leave our team every 4 years and to be able to refresh it with the same level of talent that we've enjoyed in the past. And so I'll talk about how we do that, because I think in industry we all face challenges of recruiting and getting that top-notch talent. So first, let's talk a little bit about what a CTF is. How many people here have played any sort of capture the flag contest? A large number, but not everyone. So CTF contests are not the physical running around on a football field contest. They're the digital equivalent of it, where we give people a basic challenge, or a challenge, and their goal is to solve that challenge. And the way we know they solve the challenge is they're able to provide a flag, which is just a text token that shows that they can figure out the solution. So this is a beginner CTF challenge. And if you read through it, there's a little bit of a story here about a robot trying to get home and it can't boot up. And when the robot doesn't boot up, there's an error message. And then it says, what's the flag? So what we do is we start challenging people to think, how can you solve this sort of problem? Suppose you had an error message on your screen. How would you go about solving it? Does anyone have any suggestions? Google! It's the basic thing you do. And so when we started building these contests, the first thing we had to do is start by introducing this notion that you're not confined to just the contest domain. You have to be able to Google. So CTF contests are not the physical running around on a football field contest. They're the digital equivalent of it, where we give people a basic challenge, or a challenge, and their goal is to solve that challenge. And the way we know they solve the challenge is they're able to provide a flag, which is just a text token that shows that they could figure out the solution. So this is a beginner CTF challenge. And if you read through it, there's a little bit of a story here about a robot trying to get home and it can't boot up. And when the robot doesn't boot up, there's an error message. And then it says, what's the flag? So what we do is we start challenging people to think, how can you solve this sort of problem? Suppose you had an error message on your screen. How would you go about solving it? Does anyone have any suggestions? Google! It's the basic thing you do. And so when we started building these contests, the first thing we had to do is start by introducing this notion that you're not confined to just the contest domain. You have to be able to Google. So if you simply Google for that error message, the first thing you'll find, the first hit, is that is a fat file system bug, fat file system error. Now there's many other ways that you could figure this out, but this is by far the easiest. And once you see that, you enter the word fat in as the key, you hit enter, and you get points. This is the essence of computer security contests. Now this is a very basic beginner question, but the idea that you present someone with a small challenge, they go and have to do research, figure out the solution. When they get the solution, they present you with a flag, is really the fundamental skill. Capture the flag contests come in several flavors. And I want to talk about the beginning flavor first, which is called Jeopardy-style CTF. Jeopardy-style CTFs start with a set of categories which represent what we would call hacking skills, things like cryptography, forensics, exploitation, and reverse engineering. And as you progress through the game, you get presented more and more difficult problems. So here there's a very explicit way to show the progression from a basic skill all the way to maybe a more advanced skill. But it can be gamified in many different ways. It doesn't just have to be a Jeopardy board. But the essence is, as you go through the contest, you're asked to solve a problem. And then you're given a problem that's just a little bit out of your reach, and you're given a hint on how to go about solving it. You go and you do some research, you have trial and error, you figure out a way to solve it, you enter in the solution, and then you're given a little bit harder problem, and a little bit harder problem, and a little bit harder problem. And if you think about it, what we've done in Capture the Flag contest is really done with computer security, the same thing we do with any level of education. When you started out learning math, you started out learning basic arithmetic. And once you learned arithmetic, you learned trigonometry. Then you learned algebra. Then maybe you learned calculus. And then after you get your master's or PhD, then you're at the most highest creative levels of mathematics. But it takes someone setting up a pathway for you to get there. And that's what CTFs are about. It's setting up a pathway to get there, from the most basic to the most advanced. The second thing CTFs do is they end up gamifying this experience to make it interesting. Every year, we run a contest called Pico CTF. Pico CTF is a hacking contest geared at US high school students. And the way we run this contest is we have an interactive game where as a player runs around as part of a story, they interact with different objects and they're presented with different challenges, and those challenges represent incrementally harder and harder hacking concepts to master. And through this context of really taking micro steps to get up to mastery, and then putting that into gamification, you can achieve amazing things. For example, when we look at the hackers that go through Pico CTF, which is geared at high school, they're often, by the end of that contest, doing very advanced tasks such as return-oriented programming or things that the NSA would say, yeah, that's a reasonable skill by taking this approach. So when you go about designing CTFs and you're trying to build a top-rate hacker, I think there's 3 core principles to take into consideration. The first one is the core idea between CTF is applied, deliberate practice. Now this is quite different than throwing someone into an arena, and I'm somewhat against hacking contests that start off with just throwing someone into an arena, because they haven't reached that step that they have a basic understanding of the techniques that it would take to succeed. So in CTFs, we give them challenge, and then another challenge, and another challenge, and you get familiarity, you get insight, you start to understand and get a feel for what you're doing in computer security. The second principle is autodidactic learning. In computer security, as in any field of computer science, things move far too fast for me to sit up here and pretend to be a master for which I impart all the knowledge in the world upon a student. Instead, we have to set up a system where when we give people a challenge, we let them go and do research themselves on how to go solve it, and then apply that research to a particular problem. And again, doing this in a sequence of steps. If you start with this idea that computer security is autodidactic, then what you end up with when people participate is this mindset that they don't know everything, but they can figure it out. Finally, and one of the things I love about hacking is to focus on creativity. And I'll talk more about that. But in essence, hacking is about making computers do something that they weren't intended to do. This is a creative exercise about what's possible as opposed to what you're given. So if we go through these principles on applied deliberate practice, if someone said, how do you teach program exploitation? How do you get someone to the level where they're finding 0 days in Internet Explorer or Google Chrome? Well, if you think about it, and take a very simple example such as a buffer overflow, I can explain in a lecture very easily what a buffer overflow is. In fact, this audience, we can very easily explain that, well, the programmer allocated some space in a program, but a user can provide input that's greater than that space. You put too many things on the shelf collapses. And we can go into more technical explanations, but at the end of the day, those are lecture-based. They're me telling you how it works. And a recurring thing I found in the university is I'll get up and I'll spend my 90-minute lecture talking about this is how you do a buffer overflow, this is how you exploit a heap overflow or an integer overflow. All the students are sitting there going, yep, I get it, super easy, I understand it. And then you sit them down in front of a problem and they're stumped. And that's because you have to provide a way of not just knowing the knowledge, not just understanding the technical high-level theory, but of applying that to practice. For example, if you're going to try to master buffer overflows, you have to think about how can I give people a problem where they have to determine what the real program buffer size is. It's not just this abstract. There is a program buffer size, but how do you identify it in program, the next program? How do you do it when you have source? How do you do it when you don't have source? Simple problems such as how do you create a long user input? And many buffer overflows, you're given something like 4K of input to a program that's very carefully constructed. You don't want to be sitting there on a keyboard typing 4,000 different characters individually. That's way too slow. So instead, you have to teach people how to use tools like Python just to generate user input. And it's really kind of interesting because, for example, at Carnegie Mellon, we get these people who are getting perfect scores on their math tests. They've already done computer science in high school, but they don't have an understanding of scripting tools. And so part of hacking is teaching them how to use these scripting tools to get where they want. How do you create specific attack inputs and then continuing to refine it? So I want to walk you through one CTF problem. So this is a CTF problem for 5 points, so it's considered fairly easy in our hacking contest, where at the end of the sequence, you want to know how big a buffer is. Now, many people, when they look at this program, really, the first reaction is, I have no idea what those instructions are saying. And when we're adults, often we get trapped into fear. If I don't understand it immediately, there's no way I can figure out. And part of what hacking contests are supposed to do is encourage people to go beyond that. So you'll notice in this part, given some indicators. First, the point value. The point value indicates this shouldn't be that hard. Second, we've given people hints where if they go and click on the link, they can read about material related to this subject. And we're actually asking them to figure out how it's related to this question. We know it's related, and we're asking them to do it. And so this is where the autodidactic learning comes in. People have to go read the documents and then figure out how to apply it to that problem. At Carnegie Mellon, and far too often, people think of it as this Yoda-like relationship, which is not the case, where I am the master hacker. In fact, sometimes I feel a little bit like a phony when I get up here and I talk to people about hacking because I'm not the best hacker in the room by far. But in real life, I think that this is quite different. I think this is a romantic view that we get from movies. And in real life, it's much closer to autodidactic, where you have to have your students continually master. And the purpose of the teacher or the mentor is just to set up the guardrails, to think about, well, what's something that they haven't done yet that seems within reach? And maybe even I don't know how to do it, but I bet they can, and set up those sort of challenges. So as a real life example, Richard Zhu, who ran Pwn to Own, had never hacked before in 2014. He started playing a high school hacking contest where he had only done math Olympiads before, and he came in second place nationally in this hacking contest. So he reads this. He, of course, knows very little about programming, if anything at all. He clicks on the link, and he starts going through it. For example, if you read through this link, you'll read things like, well, there's something here called func name, and you read through it and say, that must be a function. And there's something called EBP that's going to be stored above it. I'm sorry, the return address that's going to be stored above it. You're going to see that the push statement adds 4 bytes for the buffer size. You're going to see that the sub allocates another hex 0x70 bytes, and you add it together. And you know what? The first time you solve this problem, you'll probably type in 78 and then realize that that's in hex and it's the wrong number. And so you have to have this persistence to continue to go back, and you realize, I did it in hex. Now I'm going to type it in decimal with a Google converter from hex to decimal. You type it in, and you get 116. So this is what Richard did. He did this throughout the contest, and he continued to learn. And now, just a few years later, he's at the top of his field. The last part is creative problem solving. As I said, hacking is about making a machine that no one expects is possible, doing things that no one has done before. So if the challenge is simply to wipe your face, this is the hacker solution. And this is a perfectly good, shouldn't be judging it based upon how weird it looks. We should be judging it on, did it get the job done? And I want to get into this, and I want to talk about this hacking, this result versus solution dichotomy, because I think it's a very important thing to get across. In this particular problem, the goal here is to find the flag, and the solution is 116. But if you think about it, that's how I say it, but that's not really what's happening. When I type in 116, that's the flag. That's how I know the user has a solution. A solution is actually the method they went about for coming up with 116. And so at CTFs, we end up checking the result of the solution, not how they went about creating the solution. So this may seem somewhat unintuitive, but it's extremely important to get across that when you're building these hacking contests, you're giving people freedom to explore different ways to get at the right flag, but you're not constraining them to a particular method. Fundamental to creativity, and therefore, it's fundamental if you want to really create an elite hacker, you have to start with this from the beginning. You check the results, you check the flag. You don't then ask them to write a report with how they got that flag and then check that report for accuracy. I've gone into hacking contests in the military where someone has to be able to show that they defended or broke into a server and then write up how they did it, and then someone reads how they did it and checks that they went through the right checkpoints. That's simply checking whether someone can follow instructions. It's not checking if someone can think creatively. And at least at CMU, and what I've noticed from the top hackers, is it's something they rally against. Instead, they look for the creative, the elegant solution. And it's often the one that's unexpected. So for example, if you take a simple arithmetic problem like what's 2 times 2, you can start very early with kids saying, well, they may say it's 4, of course, because they memorized that. But then you can start getting into what are all the different creative ways that you can answer that question of 2 times 2. And there's many different approaches to answering it. Each as good as the other, and each illustrating something unique about mathematics, teaching them to delve deeper into how we go about solving problems. As a real-life example, there was a contest called Hack.im in 2012, where the challenge organizers built a CTF problem where they put up a PHP-powered website made by the organizers. And the organizers created a reference solution just to make sure that you could solve it based upon a particular type of vulnerability they had inserted into the problem called XPath. But remember, we're going to check the result of whether they broke into that website, not whether or not they knew about the XPath vulnerability. And there was a Dutch team that, when given this challenge, simply found a 0-day in PHP and was able to get into the computer. And the funny thing is they didn't even know about XPath. They had no idea about this vulnerability, but they found a unique solution around it. And this was really, really important because PHP powers Yahoo at the time. So by finding the 0-day, they had a lot of, they had a lot of power. Since we're at RSA, I wanted to give another example. So RSA comes from the acronyms of some mathematicians who invented an encryption algorithm: Ron Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Len Edelman. And for the purposes of this, I'm going to say RSA we can consider mathematically secure. If there's cryptographers in the room, we can qualify what the statement actually means. But for all intents and purposes, the point is, when you go up and you teach it in a classroom, you talk about how it's secure in the mathematical domain. So if someone encrypts something with RSA, how do you break it? Well, if you're taught that RSA is mathematically secure, you may think it's impossible. But that's not the hacker mentality. We need to teach people to think creatively. And one of the things hackers realized a number of years ago is it's not just about the crypto, it's not just about the math, it's about how it's implemented. And those cryptographic guarantees say nothing about the guarantee of how it's implemented. And so one of the more popular attacks that you can use against mathematically secure crypto algorithms, or something that's strongly secure, are things like timing attacks. So the way I describe timing attacks is, suppose my wife asks, do I look fat in this outfit? And then I hesitate. She knows the answer, right? Any hesitation reveals information. Any hesitation. So in crypto, if you look at things like RSA, actually there's a big timing difference between how you do decryptions. And roughly speaking, it's not really implemented this way, but if the key is 1, it takes 1 second to decrypt. If the key is 2, it takes 2 seconds to decrypt. If the key is 3, it takes 3 seconds to decrypt. So simply by asking an RSA server, like a HTTPS server, to decrypt something, I can use the timing of how long it took to infer what the key is. These are the sorts of attacks that end up being the most powerful against modern cryptography, where it's not talking about the cryptography, it's talking about the implementation. And in fact, when we launched this attack, we broke RSA in 2003 as it was deployed in OpenSSL and in Microsoft products. So this just isn't a theoretical construct. It's where hackers, when you teach this, there's a lot of power on how it can apply in real life. So when we're trying to build hackers, we think of what scientists told us is the levels of perfection can be broken down roughly into categories. And the goal is to get to that highest expert mountain, where you're the recognized authority. But you start, everyone starts at a basic knowledge and awareness. And as you go through this climb up to become one of the world's best hackers, we think the methodologies that you employ should change with them. So when we start off with someone who's just trying to get an awareness, or as a novice or an intermediate, we run Jeopardy-style CTFs because we're giving people small micro problems, and then we're asking them to come up with a creative solution, where the focus is on learning those fundamental skills, not on learning the art form of how to apply them more broadly speaking. When you get to that top level, you move beyond Jeopardy-style CTFs to attack-defense CTFs. An attack-defense CTF is one where you have teams. Every team sits down in front of their computer. And the goal is to exploit all the other teams on the network while protecting yourself against being exploited yourself. Now, the reason I say that you should leave these to the end is because what these hacking contests teach is not only skill, but strategy. For example, in these CTF contests, one strategy you have to employ is to go after the weakest. Now, you may think that's not friendly, but this is a game. The goal is to win, right? And if you were in a football game and you were on offense, you would go after things that you think the defense had the weakest players on. It's the same thing here. You get into creativity and you get into new strategies such as if the computer on the very left exploits the computer on the very right, they've actually revealed a split if they've been watching their network and can exploit the computer on the bottom. These are called reflection attacks. And if you look at top-notch attack-defense contests, if you don't do reflection, if you don't steal from other people, you don't learn as people attack how to attack others, you will never be in the top few teams. So the reason I put this up there, again, to repeat the point, often when you go to CTFs in industry, one of the questions you can ask yourself is this an attack defense? And if your team is already at the elite level, it's a great thing to do. But if they're using this as a way to teach beginners, often it's not, because the strategy techniques that you employ are quite different. And you can end up very quickly, if you're an inexperienced team, just being the one that everyone picks on. So at Carnegie Mellon, we're extremely interested first in growing the computer security field. We feel that currently we have a drought of computer security talent. And if you think about this from an economic standpoint, what you end up with potentially is a lemon market. Meaning that if someone graduates and they know just a little bit about computer security, because there's so many jobs and so few people, you grab them up. And there's kind of a race just to fill all the jobs as to find the top talent. So if you look in the long term, what you have to do is grow the field. You have to have more people, they'll get more competitive, and the competency level will rise. As the competency level rises, computer security in general will get better. The second thing is we want to encourage a large number of people to be exposed. The second is we want to identify the most and promising high school students and attract them to CMU. And third, we want to systematize this. And what I mean by systematize is not do it one-off, but create a repeatable process where we can hit a broad audience, identify the best, and bring them to CMU.